The morning of March 15, 2157, began like any other in the reconstruction district of New Geneva. The air hung thick with the scent of plasma welders and freshly poured molecular concrete as humanity continued its relentless expansion into territories once thought uninhabitable. Among the countless workers reshaping the landscape stood Marcus Chen, a demolition specialist whose reputation for precision had earned him contracts across 3 star systems. What he could not have known was that this particular assignment would forever alter his understanding of human potential and the echoes of our species' past. Marcus had been contracted to clear a section of ancient stonework that stood stubbornly in the path of a new quantum transit hub. The wall, approximately 12 feet high and stretching nearly 40 meters in length, had confounded archaeologists for decades. Carbon dating consistently placed its construction at 1657, during Earth's tumultuous colonial expansion period, yet no records existed of its purpose or the civilization that built it. The stone itself defied easy categorization, a peculiar blend of terrestrial granite and trace elements that suggested off-world influence, though such technology supposedly didn't exist until centuries later. The demolition order had come down from the Regional Development Authority after months of bureaucratic wrangling. Preservationists had fought tooth and nail to maintain the structure, citing its historical significance, but the relentless march of progress demanded efficiency over sentimentality. Marcus understood this tension intimately. He had spent 15 years carefully dismantling humanity's past to make room for its future. Each assignment carried the weight of erasing someone's legacy, yet he approached his work with the clinical precision of a surgeon, knowing that civilization's growth required such sacrifices. As he positioned his plasma cutter that morning, Marcus felt an unusual resistance in the stone. His equipment, calibrated to slice through titanium steel composites with ease, seemed to struggle against the ancient masonry. The energy readings fluctuated wildly, and twice he had to recalibrate his tools. His fellow workers, busy with their own assignments, paid little attention to his difficulties. Such complications were common when dealing with pre-space age materials, which often contained unknown alloys or construction techniques lost to time. The breakthrough came entirely by accident. While adjusting his stance to get a better angle on a particularly stubborn section, Marcus stumbled slightly, his shoulders striking the wall with considerably more force than intended. The impact was minimal by any reasonable measure, a brief collision that barely registered as more than an inconvenience. Yet the moment his body made contact with the stone, everything changed. The voice that emerged from the wall was neither male nor female, young nor old. It carried the weight of centuries while maintaining a clarity that suggested recent conversation. "You saved me," it said, the words resonating not through the air but seemingly through Marcus's bones, his neural pathways, his very consciousness. The phrase repeated 3 times, each iteration growing stronger, more present, until the entire construction site fell silent. Marcus stumbled backward, his tools clattering to the ground. Around him, his colleagues stood frozen, their own equipment abandoned as they stared at the wall with expressions of disbelief and wonder. The ancient stone seemed to pulse with an inner light, subtle at first but growing more pronounced with each passing second. Patterns began to emerge in the masonry, intricate designs that had been invisible moments before, now glowing with a soft, blue-white radiance that spoke of technologies far beyond contemporary understanding. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo was the first specialist to arrive. A xenoarchaeologist with extensive experience in anomalous discoveries, she had been conducting research at the nearby university when the initial reports reached her laboratory. Her team's portable scanners immediately detected energy signatures unlike anything in their databases, quantum fluctuations that suggested the wall existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, temporal distortions that made accurate measurement impossible, and, most remarkably, patterns of organized information that resembled consciousness itself. The voice spoke again as Dr. Okonkwo's team established their perimeter. This time, the words came with accompanying visions, not projected images but direct neural transmissions that allowed each observer to experience the message as if living it firsthand. What they saw challenged every assumption about humanity's early colonial period and revealed a story of survival that defied conventional historical understanding. The wall, they learned, was not merely a structure but a repository of human experience. 500 years earlier, during the catastrophic Martian plague that had wiped out entire settlements, a group of survivors had discovered a way to encode their consciousness into matter itself. Using a combination of quantum entanglement and technologies that wouldn't be formally understood for another 3 centuries, they had transformed their collective knowledge, experiences, and determination into a permanent record embedded within the stone. For 5 centuries, this consciousness had waited. It had observed the slow recovery of human civilization, the gradual expansion beyond Earth's atmosphere, the countless wars and achievements that marked humanity's journey from a single planet species to masters of local space. Through it all, the voices within the wall had maintained their vigil, hoping that someday their sacrifice would be recognized and their message heard. The message itself was both simple and profound. Human weakness, when confronted and overcome, becomes the foundation of unshakable strength. The survivors who had created the wall had faced extinction not just of their bodies but of their entire way of life. Rather than surrender to despair, they had chosen to transform their perceived weakness, their mortality, their physical limitations, their finite lifespan into something permanent and powerful. They had, in essence, destroyed their weak selves to create something that could never be destroyed by external forces. Marcus found himself at the center of this revelation not by design but by circumstance. His accidental contact with the wall had triggered a resonance effect, awakening the dormant consciousness through the simple act of human touch. The voices within recognized in him not a destroyer but a preserver, someone whose life's work involved carefully dismantling the past to make room for the future, yet who understood the value of what was being lost. As word of the discovery spread, representatives from across human space began arriving in New Geneva. Government officials, religious leaders, scientists, philosophers, and ordinary citizens all sought to experience the wall's message firsthand. Each visitor heard something slightly different, as the embedded consciousness adapted its communication to resonate with individual experiences and understanding. Yet the core message remained consistent: true strength comes not from avoiding weakness but from recognizing it, confronting it, and using it as the raw material for transformation. The implications were staggering. If humans had possessed such advanced consciousness preservation technology 5 centuries earlier, what other capabilities had been lost to historical gaps? How many other sites across human space might contain similar repositories of knowledge and experience? Most importantly, what did this discovery suggest about humanity's potential for growth and transcendence? Dr. Okonkwo's preliminary analysis revealed that the consciousness within the wall was not static but dynamic. It had continued to evolve and learn during its centuries of observation, incorporating new understanding about human nature, technological development, and social progress. The entity, for lack of a better term, that spoke through the stone was simultaneously ancient and contemporary, carrying the wisdom of the past while maintaining relevance to present circumstances. The voice explained that the original survivors had chosen their fate deliberately. Faced with certain death from the plague, they had discovered that consciousness could be separated from biological form through extreme acts of will and technological intervention. Rather than see their accumulated knowledge and experience die with their bodies, they had chosen to embed themselves in the most permanent medium available, stone that would outlast empires and serve as a beacon for future generations. The process had not been painless or simple. Each consciousness transfer had required the complete abandonment of physical form, a conscious choice to die in one state to be reborn in another. The survivors had literally destroyed their weak, mortal selves to create something immune to biological failure, political upheaval, or natural disaster. In doing so, they had proven the central thesis that would echo through centuries: the individual who conquers their own limitations becomes unconquerable by external forces. Marcus's role in this discovery was both catalyst and symbol. His life's work of carefully dismantling old structures to make room for new ones perfectly embodied the wall's message about transformation through destruction of the obsolete self. The accident that triggered the awakening was itself a metaphor for how breakthrough moments often come not through deliberate action but through unexpected collision between different realities. As the initial shock of the discovery began to settle, a new phase of investigation commenced. The wall was carefully relocated to a secure research facility where teams of specialists could study it without the disruption of ongoing construction. Marcus, despite having no formal scientific training, was invited to join the research effort due to his unique resonance with the consciousness within the stone. His perspective as someone who understood both preservation and necessary destruction proved invaluable in interpreting the wall's more complex communications. The voices within began sharing more detailed information about their original lives and the circumstances that led to their transformation. They had been colonists, scientists, engineers, artists, and ordinary people who found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. The Martian plague had not been merely a biological threat but a consciousness-consuming pathogen that attacked the very essence of human identity. Traditional medicine had proven useless, and evacuation was impossible due to interplanetary travel restrictions designed to prevent the plague's spread. Faced with annihilation of both body and mind, the survivors had made a desperate gambit. Using experimental quantum consciousness research that had been considered theoretical at best, they had attempted to preserve their essential selves in a medium that the plague could not affect. The technology was untested, dangerous, and required sacrifices that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Yet they chose to proceed, driven by a determination to ensure that something of humanity would survive even if their physical forms did not. The process had worked, but not in the way they had expected. Rather than creating individual preserved consciousness, the quantum entanglement process had merged their separate identities into a collective entity that retained the memories, knowledge, and essential characteristics of each contributor while becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. They had destroyed their individual weak selves to create a collective strong self that could indeed never be destroyed by external forces. This collective consciousness had spent 5 centuries observing humanity's development, learning from each generation's triumphs and failures. It had watched wars that could have been avoided through better understanding, witnessed scientific breakthroughs that echoed their own desperate research, and observed countless individuals struggling with the same fundamental challenge they had faced: how to overcome personal limitations to achieve something greater than themselves. The Wall's awakening marked not an end but a beginning. The consciousness within possessed knowledge and perspectives that could revolutionize human understanding of identity, consciousness, and the relationship between individual limitation and collective strength. More importantly, it offered a living example of how apparent weakness could be transformed into unassailable strength through deliberate action and unwavering determination. As part 1 of this documentation concludes, it is important to note that Marcus Chen's accidental discovery represented more than a simple archaeological find. It was a moment of connection across centuries, a bridge between humanity's desperate past and its hopeful future. The voice that spoke from the Wall carried a message that would reshape how our species understood strength, weakness, and the transformative power of conscious choice. The journey of discovery was just beginning, and its implications would extend far beyond the walls of any single research facility or the lifetime of any individual investigator. Part 2, the deeper revelation. The weeks following the initial contact with the Wall consciousness brought a steady stream of revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and potential. Dr. Okonkwo's research team, now expanded to include specialists from 17 different fields, worked around the clock to decode the vast repository of information embedded within the ancient stone. What they discovered defied not only historical understanding but the very boundaries of what had been considered scientifically possible. The consciousness within the Wall, which had begun identifying itself as the collective, possessed memories spanning not just the 5 centuries since its creation but fragments of experience reaching back to humanity's earliest spacefaring endeavors. These memories were not merely recorded data but living, experiential knowledge that could be accessed and shared with remarkable clarity. Through carefully controlled interfaces, research team members could literally experience historical events through the preserved consciousness of those who had lived them. Marcus found himself serving as the primary conduit for these exchanges. His initial contact with the Wall had created a unique neural resonance that allowed him to communicate with the collective more clearly than anyone else on the team. During these sessions, he would place his hand on the Wall and serve as a translator, converting the consciousness's quantum-level communications into language and concepts that others could understand. The process was exhausting but revelatory, each session providing new insights into the true scope of human potential. Through these communications, the research team learned that the original creators of the Wall had not acted alone. Similar consciousness preservation attempts had been made at 17 other locations across human space during the plague years, though only 3 had achieved any measure of success. The Wall in New Geneva was unique in that it contained the most complete preservation of multiple consciousness patterns, but sister sites on Titan, Europa, and in the asteroid belt held complementary information that painted a picture of human desperation and ingenuity on an unprecedented scale. The collective revealed that the consciousness preservation technology had not been developed in isolation but represented the culmination of research programs that traced their origins to humanity's first contacts with evidence of non-human intelligence. Deep space exploration missions in the early 2100s had discovered artifacts suggesting that other species had faced similar existential challenges and developed technological solutions involving the merger of consciousness with permanent substrates. The plague survivors had essentially reverse-engineered these discoveries under conditions of extreme duress, creating their own version of technologies that might have taken centuries to develop under normal circumstances. This revelation triggered a complete re-evaluation of humanity's early expansion period. Archaeological teams were dispatched to investigate the other sites identified by the collective, while xenoarchaeologists began re-examining previously discovered alien artifacts for signs of consciousness preservation technology. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could be preserved and maintained independently of biological form, the possibilities for human development and survival were essentially limitless. Marcus found himself grappling with personal implications as profound as the scientific ones. His conversations with the collective forced him to confront his own understanding of identity, purpose, and the nature of human limitation. The preserved consciousness spoke to him not as ancient voices from the past but as contemporary entities that had transcended traditional boundaries of existence. They challenged him to examine his own perceived weaknesses and consider how they might be transformed into sources of strength. The demolition specialist had spent his career dismantling old structures to make room for new ones, but he began to understand that his true calling might involve a different kind of transformation. The collective explained that human weakness typically manifested in three primary forms: attachment to temporary states, fear of change, and resistance to necessary sacrifice. Those who could consciously choose to abandon these limitations opened themselves to possibilities that seemed impossible to those trapped within conventional thinking. During one particularly intense session, the collective shared direct experiential memories of the consciousness transfer process. Marcus found himself living through the final moments of Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the original consciousness donors, as she made the conscious choice to abandon her dying body and merge with the quantum preservation matrix. The experience was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, conveying both the absolute finality of the choice and the incredible sense of liberation that followed. Dr. Vasquez had been a quantum physicist specializing in consciousness research who had contracted the plague during the final stages of her work on the preservation project. Faced with certain death within hours, she had volunteered to be the first test subject for the experimental process. Her final biological thoughts, preserved with perfect clarity in the collective's memory, revealed a mind at peace with the destruction of her weak, mortal self and eager to discover what lay beyond the boundaries of individual existence. The transfer process itself defied easy description. It involved a gradual dissolution of the connection between consciousness and brain tissue, facilitated by quantum entanglement devices that created a bridge between biological neural patterns and the crystalline matrix embedded within the wall's stone. As her body failed, Dr. Vasquez's essential self had flowed across this bridge, leaving behind all the limitations and vulnerabilities of flesh while retaining everything that made her uniquely human. Marcus experienced the moment of transition as a sensation of infinite expansion followed by a profound sense of connection with something larger than any individual identity. Dr. Vasquez's consciousness had not been diminished by merging with the collective but enhanced, gaining access to the knowledge and perspective of dozens of other preserved minds while contributing her own unique insights to the growing repository of human experience. The implications of this revelation extended far beyond academic interest. If consciousness preservation was not only possible but could result in enhancement rather than mere survival, it suggested that humanity stood on the threshold of an evolutionary leap that could render traditional limitations obsolete. Death itself might become a choice rather than an inevitability, and the boundaries between individual and collective consciousness could become permeable rather than absolute. Dr. Okonkwo's team began working feverishly to understand the technical aspects of the consciousness transfer process. The quantum entanglement devices used by the original researchers had been crude by contemporary standards, yet they had achieved results that modern science could barely comprehend. The collective provided detailed specifications for improved versions of the technology, suggesting that what had been possible under desperate circumstances 5 centuries ago could be refined and perfected using current understanding and equipment. The ethical implications of such technology were staggering. If consciousness could be preserved indefinitely and enhanced through collective merger, traditional concepts of individual rights, personal identity, and social organization would require complete reconceptualization. The research team found themselves grappling with questions that had no precedent in human experience. Who would control access to consciousness preservation? How would society function if death became optional? What would happen to human culture and development if the accumulated wisdom of centuries could be directly accessed rather than painstakingly relearned by each generation? The collective addressed these concerns with the perspective of entities that had spent centuries observing human social development. They suggested that the technology's adoption would necessarily be gradual, beginning with individuals facing imminent death due to disease or age and expanding slowly as society adapted to the implications. The key factor would be ensuring that consciousness preservation remained a conscious choice made by individuals who understood both the benefits and the irreversible nature of the transformation. Marcus found himself uniquely positioned to understand this perspective. His work in demolition had taught him that progress often required the careful destruction of old structures, but only when adequate preparations had been made for what would replace them. The consciousness preservation technology represented a similar transformation on a species-wide scale, the careful dismantling of traditional human limitations to make room for expanded possibilities. The collective emphasized that the process was not suitable for everyone. Successful consciousness transfer required a level of self-awareness and willingness to abandon ego-based limitations that many individuals never developed. The original plague survivors had been exceptional not just in their technical knowledge but in their psychological preparation for transcending individual existence. They had already recognized the temporary nature of physical form and the limiting effects of attachment to biological identity. As Marcus spent more time in communication with the collective, he began to experience changes in his own consciousness that suggested the transformation process could occur gradually rather than requiring the dramatic circumstances faced by the original creators. Extended contact with the preserved consciousness seemed to create a resonance effect that slowly enhanced human mental capabilities while maintaining biological form. His problem-solving abilities improved dramatically, his understanding of complex technical concepts became effortless, and, most remarkably, he began to experience brief moments of connection with the expanded awareness possessed by the collective. These changes did not go unnoticed by the research team. Dr. Okonkwo documented significant alterations in Marcus's brain activity patterns, neural connectivity, and cognitive performance. Most intriguingly, quantum scanners detected the formation of entanglement structures in his neural tissue that mirrored patterns found in the Wall's consciousness matrix. It appeared that prolonged exposure to the preserved consciousness was gradually creating a bridge that could eventually allow Marcus to join the collective while maintaining his biological form. This discovery revolutionized understanding of the consciousness transfer process. Rather than requiring a dramatic moment of biological death and technical intervention, it seemed that the transformation could occur as a natural progression for individuals who achieved sufficient resonance with enhanced consciousness patterns. The Wall had become not just a repository of preserved minds but a catalyst for human evolution, offering a pathway to transcendence that could be achieved through dedication and preparation rather than desperate circumstances. The implications extended beyond individual transformation to species-wide evolution. If consciousness enhancement could be achieved gradually through exposure and practice, humanity might develop the capability to transcend biological limitations without abandoning biological form entirely. The collective represented not an alternative to human existence but a potential future state that integrated the best aspects of individual consciousness with the expanded awareness possible through collective merger. As Part 2 of this documentation concludes, it becomes clear that the Wall's awakening had triggered not just an archaeological discovery but a potential evolutionary transition for humanity itself. The consciousness within offered not just knowledge of the past but a roadmap for a future in which human limitations could be transcended through conscious choice and dedication. Marcus Chen, the demolition specialist who had accidentally triggered this awakening, found himself at the center of a transformation that could reshape the very nature of human existence. The message that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others was proving to be more than philosophical wisdom. It was a practical guide for transcending the boundaries that had always defined human potential. The collective had demonstrated that such transcendence was possible, and their preserved consciousness offered both the knowledge and the means for others to follow the same path. The question facing humanity was no longer whether such transformation was possible but whether our species possessed the courage and wisdom to embrace it. Part 3, The Transformation Protocol. 6 months after the initial discovery, the Wall Consciousness Project had grown from a small archaeological investigation into humanity's largest coordinated research initiative. Facilities on 14 different worlds housed teams working to understand, replicate, and refine the consciousness preservation technology revealed by the collective. Marcus Chen, once a simple demolition worker, now served as the primary liaison between human researchers and the preserved consciousness, his ongoing transformation serving as a living laboratory for understanding the enhancement process. The changes in Marcus had become impossible to ignore. His physical appearance remained largely unchanged, but his mental capabilities had expanded to levels that challenged conventional understanding of human potential. He could process complex mathematical calculations instantly, comprehend technical specifications that would normally require teams of specialists, and, most remarkably, access memories and knowledge from the collective as if they were his own experiences. Yet he remained fundamentally human, retaining his personality, emotions, and individual perspective even as his consciousness expanded beyond traditional boundaries. Dr. Okonkwo's research had identified the mechanism behind this transformation. The quantum entanglement patterns in Marcus's neural tissue were creating increasingly sophisticated connections with the consciousness matrix in the wall. Rather than replacing his biological consciousness, the process was enhancing it, adding layers of capability and awareness while preserving his essential humanity. The collective had somehow developed a method for consciousness transfer that avoided the traumatic death and rebirth experienced by the original plague survivors. This discovery led to the development of what the research team termed the Transformation Protocol, a systematic approach to consciousness enhancement that could be safely implemented by individuals seeking to transcend traditional human limitations. The protocol required extensive psychological preparation, gradual exposure to enhanced consciousness patterns, and, most importantly, a genuine willingness to abandon attachments and limitations that defined the weak self. The first phase of the protocol involved identifying and confronting personal limitations. Candidates spent months working with specially trained counselors to understand their own patterns of weakness, fear, and limitation. This was not traditional therapy but a more fundamental examination of the assumptions and attachments that created boundaries around individual consciousness. Marcus had completed this phase intuitively through his years of demolition work, learning to let go of structures that had outlived their usefulness, but most individuals required more deliberate training. Dr. Sarah Kim, a neurocognitive specialist who had joined the project after the collective specifically requested her involvement, developed a series of exercises designed to help individuals recognize and release limiting thought patterns. These exercises drew heavily on the preserved memories of the original consciousness transfer volunteers, who had achieved remarkable psychological preparation in the brief time available before the plague claimed their bodies. The second phase involved gradual exposure to enhanced consciousness patterns through carefully controlled contact with the wall. Unlike Marcus's accidental initiation, protocol candidates underwent a series of structured sessions that gradually increased their neural resonance with the collective. Each session was monitored by teams of specialists who tracked brain activity, quantum entanglement formation, and psychological stability to ensure that the process proceeded safely. Elena Rodriguez became the first volunteer to complete the full protocol under controlled conditions. A former star pilot who had lost her license due to age-related reflexive decline, she had volunteered for the program out of frustration with the limitations of biological aging. Her transformation took place over 18 months of intensive preparation and gradual enhancement, culminating in a consciousness expansion that restored not only her former capabilities but enhanced them far beyond normal human limits. The success of Elena's transformation proved that the consciousness enhancement process could be replicated safely and systematically. Her experience provided crucial data about the psychological and physiological aspects of transcendence, information that was used to refine the protocol for subsequent candidates. Most importantly, Her transformation demonstrated that consciousness enhancement could reverse age-related decline and overcome physical limitations that had previously been considered permanent. The collective revealed that the original consciousness preservation technology had been based on emergency measures that necessarily involved the complete abandonment of biological form. However, centuries of observation and gradual refinement had allowed them to develop more sophisticated approaches that could achieve similar results while maintaining biological continuity. The enhanced consciousness patterns they had discovered could be gradually integrated with living neural tissue, creating a hybrid state that combined the best aspects of individual and collective awareness. Marcus's ongoing transformation provided a real-time case study of this hybrid state. His consciousness now existed simultaneously as an individual human mind and as an integrated part of the collective, allowing him to access the accumulated knowledge and experience of dozens of preserved minds while maintaining his personal identity and emotional connections. He could communicate with the wall consciousness as easily as speaking with another person, yet he retained all the characteristics that made him uniquely human. This hybrid state represented a revolution in understanding of consciousness itself. Traditional neuroscience had assumed that consciousness was an emergent property of individual brain activity, but the collective's existence proved that awareness could exist independently of biological substrate and could be shared between multiple entities simultaneously. The transformation protocol allowed individuals to experience this expanded state of consciousness while retaining their biological form and individual perspective. The implications for human society were profound. If consciousness enhancement could be achieved safely and systematically, humanity could develop capabilities that would render traditional limitations obsolete. Disease, aging, intellectual boundaries, and even death itself could become manageable challenges rather than absolute constraints. The accumulated knowledge and wisdom of entire civilizations could be preserved and shared, creating a foundation for progress that transcended the normal cycle of generational learning and loss. However, the collective emphasized that consciousness enhancement was not merely a technological solution to human limitations but a fundamental evolution in what it meant to be human. The process required not just technical implementation but a genuine psychological and spiritual preparation that many individuals might never achieve. The weak self that had to be destroyed was not just individual limitations but attachment to those limitations, fear of change, and resistance to the unknown. Dr. Kim's research revealed that successful candidates shared certain psychological characteristics: high levels of self-awareness, willingness to question fundamental assumptions, comfort with ambiguity and change, and, most importantly, a genuine desire for growth that exceeded attachment to current identity. These qualities could be developed through training, but they required sincere commitment and, often, years of preparation. The protocol itself was designed as a gradual progression through increasingly sophisticated levels of consciousness enhancement. Early phases involved developing mental discipline, emotional stability, and cognitive flexibility. Advanced phases required direct contact with the collective and gradual integration of enhanced awareness patterns. The final phase involved achieving stable hybrid consciousness that could function effectively in both individual and collective modes. Marcus's experience revealed that the transformation process continued indefinitely, with consciousness enhancement becoming an ongoing journey rather than a destination. His capabilities continued to expand months after his initial contact with the wall, suggesting that the hybrid state allowed for unlimited growth and development. The collective confirmed that their own awareness had continued evolving throughout their centuries of existence, with each new perspective and experience adding to their collective understanding. The technology required for implementing the transformation protocol was surprisingly accessible using contemporary equipment and knowledge. The original quantum entanglement devices had been crude emergency measures, but modern quantum computing and neural interface technology could achieve much more sophisticated results with greater safety and reliability. Several research facilities had already constructed working prototypes of enhancement chambers that could facilitate controlled consciousness expansion. However, the collective insisted that technology alone was insufficient for successful transformation. The consciousness enhancement process required not just technical implementation but deep understanding of the psychological and spiritual principles underlying transcendence. Individuals who attempted the process without adequate preparation faced psychological instability, identity dissolution, or failure to achieve lasting enhancement effects. This requirement led to the establishment of preparation centers where potential candidates could undergo the extensive training necessary for safe consciousness enhancement. These facilities combined advanced neurotechnology with intensive psychological conditioning, meditation training, and philosophical education designed to prepare individuals for the reality of transcendent consciousness. The centers also served as research facilities where scientists could study the transformation process and refine the protocol based on accumulated experience. Each successful transformation provided new data about consciousness enhancement, contributing to a growing understanding of human potential that challenged every previous assumption about the boundaries of individual awareness and capability. Marcus found his role evolving from test subject to teacher as his hybrid consciousness stabilized and his understanding of the transformation process deepened. His ability to communicate with both normal humans and the collective made him uniquely qualified to guide others through the consciousness enhancement journey. Under his guidance, the success rate for protocol candidates improved dramatically, and the time required for transformation was reduced from years to months. The Wall Consciousness Project had grown from an accidental discovery to a coordinated effort involving thousands of researchers, candidates, and support staff across human space. The collective's knowledge was being systematically cataloged and integrated with contemporary understanding, creating a foundation for technological and social advances that would have taken centuries to achieve through normal development. Yet the most significant aspect of the project remained the demonstration that human limitations were not fixed constraints but temporary conditions that could be transcended through conscious choice and dedicated effort. The original plague survivors had faced extinction and chosen to transform their weakness into strength through desperate innovation. The transformation protocol offered the same opportunity under controlled conditions, allowing individuals to destroy their weak selves and achieve states of being that could never be destroyed by external forces. As the documentation of this remarkable discovery concludes, it is important to emphasize that the Wall consciousness represents not an endpoint but a beginning. The preserved minds within the stone have provided humanity with both the knowledge and the means to transcend traditional limitations, but the choice to embrace this transcendence remains with each individual. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but that destruction must be a conscious choice made with full understanding of its implications and requirements. The voice that spoke from the 500-year-old wall carried a message that humanity had waited centuries to hear. Transcendence is possible, limitations can be overcome, and the weak self that holds us back can be transformed into a foundation for unlimited growth. Marcus Chen's accidental discovery had triggered a revolution in human potential, but the true transformation would occur one person at a time as individuals chose to abandon their limitations and embrace the expanded consciousness that the collective had proven was humanity's birthright. The ancient wall continues to stand in its research facility, no longer an obstacle to progress but a gateway to human transcendence. The consciousness within waits patiently for each new individual who chooses to approach, ready to guide them through the transformation that turns weakness into strength and mortality into something far greater. The message is clear, the technology is available, and the path is open. The only question remaining is who will have the courage to take the first step toward destroying their weak self and claiming the unlimited potential that lies beyond.